कथितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्।
ॐ असतो मा सत्कमया तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमया मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमया आविराविर्महेति रुद्रयत्ते दक्षिणं मुखं तेन मां पाहि नित्यम्. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we shall resume our study in the section of the Gita that we are studying since last couple of weeks. We saw that this portion of the Gita, the 7th chapter, is called the Jnana Vijnana Yoga. And we have seen that Jnana here means indirect knowledge and Vijnana means direct knowledge. Krishna begins by showing how there are two levels, two dimensions of Prakriti, or two dimensions of nature. Nature is probably not the best way to translate Prakriti, but that's how it generally gets translated. So one is the material part of this world and material part of our own personality as well. And that we saw is constituted of all these primal elements which begin as very subtle and then later on through different permutations and combinations become this visible, tangible universe in which we live and move and breathe. Similarly, in our own personality, there is this visible, tangible part of our personality, the body and the mind. So everything that we can either see or feel or become aware of their existence through either our senses or the mind. Krishna also says then there is a higher dimension, a higher Prakriti, which is pure consciousness. So there is the material reality, and pure consciousness is the spirit, the spiritual reality. So the world that we see and ourselves, our place in it, the way we see ourselves in it, are a combination of matter and spirit. Matter is oftentimes called in Sanskrit as jada. Spirit or consciousness is called chit. And this combination of matter and spirit, they have almost kind of been knotted together. And so the phrase that is used in Sanskrit texts is called chit jada granthi. Granthi means a knot. So the material part of reality and the spiritual part of reality have kind of been tied together with a knot that is not easy to separate. So chit jada granthi. And the difficulty in separating this knot we see when Krishna gives that rather depressing statistic when he says that among thousands of people who strive for freedom, and by freedom really is meant to remove this knot, this matter and spirit which have kind of gotten fastened to one another, the ability to separate them. So among the thousands who try, among the thousands, perhaps a few people try. And then among the few people who try, perhaps a few might succeed in doing so. So the chances look pretty grim of any of us doing it. And yet, those of us who have taken to spiritual life want us, every one of us feels, I want to be the one. I want to be among those few who succeed in breaking this knot. This knot, this tying together of matter and spirit, that is the state in which all of us are today. That's why in a series of verses that come afterwards, Krishna says how that consciousness is present in every material entity that we see, because the two are really tied together. But I, this Krishna, when he uses the word I, he meaning the spirit, he says, I am consciousness. So although consciousness and matter are mixed, intermixed, and tied together, the reality, the spirit, is just that consciousness, not the material part. And therefore the material part is often seen as a kind of a covering, which is how we tend to think of the body, the covering of the body, the covering of the mind, and then the spirit within. And we saw last week how that itself is a kind of a conundrum. Is the spirit inside me, or am I inside the spirit? Because the spirit is infinite and the body is finite. So how can the infinite be put inside the finite? Take a look at 13 and 14. Let's read them. Tribhir gunamayair bhavair ebhiv sarvamidam jagat mohitam nabhijanati mamebhyah paramavyayam daivi hyesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mavebaye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. Deluded by the states, the modifications of the three gunas, all this world does not know me, who is beyond them and immutable. Verily, this divine illusion of mine, constituted of the gunas, is difficult to cross over. Those who devote themselves to me alone, cross over this illusion. So this is one place among the many in the Gita where the word Maya makes its appearance. And Daivi Yesha Gunamayi, this divine Maya of mine is Daivi, it's divine. Duratyaya, it's difficult to cross. Now, when we speak about crossing, it just feels like it is some barrier. And the barrier is, as I said, this matter and spirit tied together, and our ability to separate them, that is being the main problem here. You'll find the word Maya appearing again in verse number 25. Let me read that verse. Naham prakashas sarvasya yoga maya samavritah mudhoyam nabhijanati loko mam ajamavyayam. Veiled by the illusion born of the congress of the gunas, I am not manifest to all. This deluded world knows me not, the unborn, the immutable. So the idea Krishna is pointing out here is that his real nature, that he is that immutable, infinite, conscious being, nobody or very few people have known the spirit as it is, have known God as God is, because there has been this veiled by the illusion born of the meeting of the gunas. And the gunas, as we have seen, sattva, rajas, tamas, are the primary attributes of the material world. So everything that is material is constituted of these three gunas. So these three gunas are a kind of a barrier, a covering, which does not allow me to see the reality as it is. So, the word Maya will occur again in several places throughout the Gita, and that's the word that we will try to reflect on this morning. Swami Vivekananda referred to Maya as an important pillar, one of the pillars upon which the edifice of Vedanta stands. So, in other words, a major pillar, if it's taken off or it's broken, then the whole roof will collapse. Now, here by that is meant that if I don't understand what Maya is, my understanding of Vedanta will not be complete. If I have to understand even conceptually, even Vedanta as a philosophy, I must have a fairly clear idea of what Maya is or what Maya means. In order to understand what Maya is, we have to begin by looking at two different ways we generally tend to understand anything or examine anything or make sense of anything. One is the objective way of looking at it. The other is the subjective way of looking at things. It's quite possible that the early human beings, or whenever this questioning began, it's possible that one of the early questions may have been that this world in which we live and move, how did this world come about? Who made this world? What was its origin? How did it begin? So when we try to ask questions like this, the invariable approach to such kind of questions is to look at this objective world and say, how did it come? Who made it? When did it begin? What was the process? A subjective way of looking at this world would be, why does the world appear to me in this way? The reason most of our observations are objective, are looking at things in an objective way, because of this belief that things are the way I see them. If I see this chair in front of me and the chair is red in color, then that's the color of the chair. If I hear a certain sound, then that sound must be the way I hear it. So it is that belief that things are the way I see them, the sound is the way I hear it, things are the way my senses grasp them, is the basis of all objective observation, analysis, and conclusions. Most of the material sciences kind of assume that there is this objective world, and this objective world can be measured, its properties known, and so on. But then there is this other approach to things, and that is, maybe the process of seeing itself may be changing the things that are seen. Am I contributing in some form to whatever I see outside? Is there a subjective element to all the objective perceptions that I have. And it's difficult to deny a subjective element to all of these things. There is, first of all, the, the physical equipment which we have to understand the material world. And the physical equipment really is the body. Now, wonderful as the human body is, we know, even with the help of science, that the senses that we have a limited range. They can see, we sometimes you say, if your eyes are in good condition, you can see everything. No, I don't think we cannot see everything. There are only a certain frequencies, the certain frequencies of light, certain colors, certain way these I can't use too many science terms because that's not been my specialty, but there is a certain range within which my eyes can see. And we know, of course, that cats and some animals can see in the dark, which you and I cannot. So even when we say that I can see everything, we have to admit, no, I cannot see everything. I can see things which are within the range of the human, what the human eye is capable of seeing. But we know there are lots of things which my human eye cannot see. And yes, sure, with the help of instruments, if I have a powerful microscope, I might be able to see things which I cannot see with my naked eye. If I have a powerful telescope, I might be able to see things which my eye cannot see. So there are things out there, either the huge astronomical bodies, the distant galaxies, or these microorganisms, even the COVID virus for that matter. Just because I cannot see it, well, none of us has seen the virus, but we know it is there. So really, we are not seeing everything, not with the equipment that we have. But also the mind. The mind is limited as well. We'll see what the limitations of the mind are. But even before we go there, we can see that the mind is not an objective, or let me put it this way, the mind is not a neutral instrument. The mind already has its own ideas. The mind already has its own biases, prejudices, its likes, its dislikes, its judgments about things. And so when I'm seeing something, I'm not just seeing it. I'm also seeing my reaction to it. So if I see a chair in front of me, but right now I'm seeing a lot of empty chairs in front of me. That's why this example of the chair comes to my mind again and again. But so when I look at the chair, I'm not just seeing a chair. Well, of course, I'm seeing the chair, but I'm also seeing something more than the chair. Along with the chair comes to me the idea, oh, this chair looks beautiful, or I love this color, or maybe I don't like this color. Now, because I know when these chairs were got and the circumstances in which these chairs came and so on, so a lot of history associated with this chair also comes to my mind whenever I look at them. So I'm not just seeing the chair the way a camera here would see it. A camera would be completely neutral. It would have no idea of the history of the chair. It would have no judgments or opinions about how the chair is. But when I see it, I'm not just seeing it. I'm seeing a chair associated or covered with all these things. What this means in effect is that with the instrument that I have, the body and mind, the world that I see, or when I see even myself, when whatever my notion of the self is, I'm really using my body and mind. In fact, when we want to look at ourselves, we do stand before a mirror. And we think we are seeing ourselves in the mirror. First of all, we are not seeing ourselves. First, we are seeing a reflection of we are not even seeing the body. Well, if I have to see the body, I need to look here. But if I stand before a mirror, what I'm really seeing is a reflection of my body. And I assume that, well, that's a good enough copy of mine, so that by looking at that reflection, I know how this body looks. I cannot see myself, my mind in the mirror, but I don't need a mirror for that. If I have the ability to reflect, to look within, I know what's going on inside my mind. Am I being objective enough even when I look at my own body and in my own mind? And probably not. Because when I look at the body, the idea that this is my body, the attachment, the identity with this body is also a part of my perception of my body. As opposed to seeing other human beings. They have a body too. They have a mind too. But that's not my body. That's not my mind. And so even whether we look at the world, the non-living objects in the world, or we look at other people or look at ourselves, there's always the subjective mixed up with the objective. And therefore that is the kind of question we need to ask. That the world that I see may not be exactly the world that is out there, because I'm seeing the world with my senses that are limited, with my mind that is colored. So what I am seeing outside is a world that I have somehow made my own. Holy Mother once said, a saying of Sharda Devi that is often quoted, if you want peace of mind, don't look at the faults of others. Rather look at your own faults. No one is a stranger, my child. The world is your own. Now, that the world is your own can be understood in many different ways. And one obviously is that not to look upon others as strangers, that they are our own. And that's a very good way to reflect on it. But if you look at that same statement of Mother philosophically, the world is your own, that is true even philosophically. The world that I see is truly my own. And in the world that I see, I am the observer. Everything other than me is an object of my perception. That's my world. Everything other than me is an object. Now, the world that you see, you are the subject of your world. And everything other than you is an object of your perception. Now, at least in one significant way, the world that you see and the world I see are different. In my world, this is the subject. You are an object of my perception. In your world, you are the subject. I am the object of your perception. So that is one major difference. So it's not really accurate to say that we are all seeing the same world. And this is just the beginning, because we know if you ask a bunch of people how this world is, we'll get a variety of answers. Some people might say, this is wonderful, this world is so great. Some people might say, this is terrible. Same thing with regard to people. We just had an election. So there could be, you ask about a certain person, and people say, oh, this person is so wonderful, we love this person. And there would be another group of the population which say, oh, I hate this person, is terrible. Now, then the question would be, are they really seeing the same person, or are they seeing two different people? So that's what I mean by our mind being colored, and what we are seeing may not be the objective reality, the objective world, the person as the person is, but a person colored by our own ideas, our own thoughts, our own likes, our own prejudices, and so on. If all of this makes sense up to this point, then I have to also say, what about me? If the world that I see may not be exactly the way the world is, then the way I see myself, am I the way I see myself? If my knowledge of the world is imperfect because of the limitations of the equipment that are available to me, is my perception of myself accurate? Because again, I'm using the same equipment. So, what are these limitations? In Vedanta texts, often speak about these limitations as threefold. The Sanskrit words for these limitations are desha, kala, nimitta. I said earlier about the limitations of the body and mind. And those limitations are these three: space, time, and causality. In other words, everything that the body and mind do is within this domain of time, space, and causality. It's impossible for the mind to think of anything beyond time. And we got the phrase beyond time, but the mind itself cannot think of something which is beyond time. The mind cannot visualize of things that are not in space. Again, by space means space, not like outer space, because the word space gets used in many different ways. So we always think of things spatially. If something exists, it exists somewhere. If something exists, it exists in some time. Did it exist in the past? Is it present now? Would it continue to exist in the future? If something exists, we ask, when did it come into being? When was it born? How long will it stay? If something exists, we ask, how did it come about? What caused it? What is it a result of? Does it in turn produce something else? So that's the way the human mind thinks, within time, space, and causality. And the reality itself is not bound by these three. So the reality is much vaster, much bigger than this little bubble of time, space, and causality. So in other words, even when we think about the infinite, because the thinking is done by the mind and the mind is limited, the mind can dwell only within the domain of time, space, and causality. Even my thoughts of the infinite, even my conceptualization of that infinite is still somehow colored by the idea of time, space, and causality. Which is how then we oftentimes think about God in heaven. Heaven is some kind of a place where God is. We think about the beginning of the world, that God created the world. The world started at some point. Again, the idea of time, that God being the cause of this world. But the reality, which is beyond, it's not limited by these three, is much vaster. And there is no way we can know that reality as it is, because the equipment is not enough. There are certain things we can do to enhance the limitations of the senses. And clearly we use microscopes, we use telescopes, by which we are kind of able to extend the range of things I can see, for instance. It's just like you have a router for your Wi-Fi, and then maybe that the range of that router doesn't cover the entire nook and corner of your house. And then you sometimes might use what they sometimes call the boosters or extenders. There are these kind of small gadgets which will extend the range of your Wi-Fi. So similarly, our mind, our eyes, for instance, can see only within a certain range. Then I can use these extenders. I can use a microscope to see tiny things that my eye cannot see. I can use a telescope to see distant objects that my eye may not be able to see. So it is possible to extend it to some extent, but we cannot extend it infinitely. There is a limitation even to how much we can extend it, at least so far. I spoke about space, time, and causality. Interesting thing about space, time, and causality are they are not absolutes in themselves. We already know from the theory of relativity about space and time, how they are interrelated. But even if we don't go there, and there is a lot, very fascinating study of relativity itself about the how space and time are not absolutes in themselves, how they act and interact upon one another. In addition to that way of thinking, we know that time itself is very subjective. If we are enjoying something, then time seems to move very fast. We don't even know. And if we are not enjoying it, then the time suddenly slows down. So now, many of us, when we were in school or when you are attending lectures like this, sometimes it might seem as if, wow, the lecture got over so quickly. And usually, more or less, the time that the lecture takes is same. But when the lecture is interesting, when you are enjoying the topic, the way it's presented, and it's something that you are interested in, then the time seems to move fast. But if it's a boring lecture, then of course you say, when is this going to finish? It just seems like time is moving very slowly. So there is a subjective element to time. Later on, you can figure out whether time is moving slowly now or it's moving fast. So time, there is a subjective element to it. Space, we saw last time, I think, when we discussed the space in the heart. Now, generally we would say, well, space in the heart is pretty small. I mean, there's hardly any space. This area is pretty small. But I said, in the depth of meditation, when we make some headway into looking deeply in our own heart, we suddenly discover that that space is huge, it's infinite. So again, space itself may not be as definitive, as absolute as it sometimes might seem. There is a story that Swami Vivekananda narrated, it comes in one of our old ancient books, and Vivekananda narrated it in his lectures on Dhyana Yoga. And the story goes something like this. So Vishnu and Narada, they were once going somewhere, and they were passing through a land which was almost like desert-like. And Vishnu felt thirsty. So he asked Narada, Narada, I'm feeling thirsty. Can you please go and get me some water? And Narada said, of course. And so Vishnu rested in one place, and Narada goes in what seemed like a little village in the area. So Narada goes there and finds one home, knocks on the door to ask for water. When the door is opened, he sees a beautiful young woman there. And she's so beautiful that Narada falls in love at first sight. And so he says, can I please have water? And she says, yeah, why don't you please come in? And so he goes in, he's made to sit, and he is so charmed by the beauty of this girl. And then her parents come and meet. And then he says, I would like to marry this girl. And then they see, well, he's a good young man, and then they agree, and then they get married. And then years pass, they have children, they build a home, they lead a happy life. And then one day, there's this huge flood. There's a river nearby, and then a big flood comes. There's a rain and a flood, and this little home that they had, it gets carried away by the flood water. But he somehow manages to hold on to his family, and a lot of destruction is taking place. And then we read in the story that as he's holding, and the force of the water is so strong, so intense, that the grip from one of his little babies who he was holding, the water takes away the baby, and the baby gets carried away by the current. And he's he just is shattered to see his little baby being carried away by the water. Still he's holding on, and then again a lot of water comes, and one by one the members of his family get pushed out, and he's just so heartbroken that barely trying to survive himself. And then a huge wave comes, and then he's kind of thrown against the banks, and that's where then he suddenly finds that everything is lost. His home is gone, his family is lost, the whole village is destroyed, and he's like crying and weeping. And then suddenly he hears the voice of Vishnu, and Vishnu says, "My child, when are you returning? I've been waiting for you for half an hour. When are you bringing water for me?" And then he suddenly realizes. Now, the moral of this story is, in one sphere or in one level, only half an hour had passed. But within that half an hour, this Narada had gone, and a whole kind of almost a lifetime had passed in one way. So this relativity of time we can see in our dreams. We might sleep for 8 hours, 7, 8, 9 hours. Now within that time, the dreams that we see, maybe a certain dream that we see from our perspective of this time, I might have been dreaming for say half an hour or an hour at night. But within that hour, the time in the dream world doesn't have to be only for an hour. The duration of my life in the dream world could be for years, while from the waking perspective it could be just about half an hour. So time is relative, space is relative. So even this domain of time, space, and causality is very flexible. That is what makes life so difficult to understand. That is what makes life a bundle of contradictions. There is nothing very definitive about the world that we see through the senses, even about the world that we conceptualize through our mind. We know deep down in our heart there is this longing for freedom. We all want to be free. We kind of feel that freedom. Every one of us innately feel that somehow I'm free. But every time we try to express our freedom in some way, we know at every step there is a limitation to our freedom. For instance, you might love driving cars at great speeds and say, well, here is a great road, there is nobody on the road, I have this great car, I'm just going to drive at whatever speed I want. And then you suddenly realize, no, there is a speed limit. If I drive at any speed, then chances are some cop might notice me and I might get a ticket. So we have ideas that we are free, but we also have limitations imposed upon us. And the limitations could be in the form of not just traffic rules, but the laws under which we live. There are social boundaries, there are legal boundaries, then there are the limitations of the body and mind itself. So this idea of freedom being challenged at every point by these limitations imposed upon my body and mind and the limitations imposed upon the world outside me. Then there is the idea of knowledge and ignorance. Some people have this enormous idea, enormous desire to know, this curiosity to know. But we realize the more we try to know, the more we see what we don't know. Oftentimes, the knowledge that we have is the knowledge of our ignorance. Even the greatest of scientists, who oftentimes may know a lot more about the subject than any of us do, they have often realized that they really know very little. Every mystery that is solved shows that there is another door which yet remains to be opened. Every time you find a vaccine for a virus, you find another virus for which there is no vaccine yet. Don't think that now that the COVID vaccines are on their way, the problem is solved forever. Sorry. There would be another virus. Not, we hope it doesn't cause this much damage, but if you look at history, these kind of things have happened periodically. So on one side, there is this great hope that everything is going to be fine now. It's all going to be okay, until it's not okay anymore, until there is a crisis. The good news is, every time there is a crisis, there is also a way out of the crisis. But there's never a time when there is no crisis. There is never a time when there is a crisis but we can't get out of it. So there is this idea of freedom bound by bondage. There is the idea of knowledge, at the same time ignorance. There is the idea of immortality. And somehow, even though we see people dying around us all the time, and it's become even more vivid, more tangible now. Every day we hear about COVID-related deaths. We see how the graph is moving up. And yet, deep down, yes, there is fear, there is anxiety. We are all trying to take the best precautions we can. But deep down, somehow, we feel at one point that, now, I'm not going to be affected by this, that I'm going to survive this pandemic, I'm going to survive this crisis. And yet, there is this constant fear that I may not. What if I cannot? What if, in spite of taking best precautions, I might get infected? So there is this idea of immortality, but there is also the fear of death. That's the kind of the world in which we live. The innate sense of freedom being curtailed or stopped at every level. The innate desire to know being bound by this limitation. There are a lot of things I don't know. Every time I know something I don't know. There is this innate sense of me being free and me being immortal, that I will always be, against this constant reminder that no, there is death. And then, of course, ultimately, happiness. We see people around who are miserable. We see people suffering. And yet, we feel, no, but that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be as happy as ever. I'm going to be healthy, happy, and best in every way. Even when we see there is sickness around us, we see there is illness, we see that people are miserable, and yet we feel, that won't be for me. So that's the world in which we live, a world of contradictions. A part of me aspiring for one thing, and the other part reminding me, no, that's beyond your reach, or there are limitations to what you can aspire. So that is the world of contradictions is the world of Maya. So although the Maya might get translated as illusion, it's not really an illusion. It simply means it's the world as we see it. Swami Vivekananda therefore called it, Maya is a statement of facts. It's just as they are. The facts don't always make sense. They are very contradictory. They don't always go in our objective, linear way of looking at things. But that's just the kind of contradictory world in which we live. So that world as it is Maya. So when in Vedanta it is said the world is unreal or the world has no existence, people immediately jump to the wrong conclusion that, well, that's ridiculous. How can you say the world is unreal? I'm seeing it. So when it is said in Vedanta that the world is unreal, that world has no existence, what is meant is that the world has no independent existence. The world has no existence independent of me. That the world I see depends on me. The kind of world I see depends on me. When I am absent, the world is absent too, as in sleep. This world that I see as long as I'm awake. When I'm asleep, I am absent from this world and the world is absent for me. So the idea that the world is unreal, meaning the world does not have an existence independent of me. That's the meaning of the phrase often attributed to Vedantic thinking, that the world is unreal. What it means is the world is not an unchangeable, immovable, infinite existence. But we cannot say that the world doesn't exist because we are seeing it. So that's another contradiction that we have. We cannot affirm the absolute independent existence of the world, seeing that it depends on me and you and every one of us, and yet we cannot say the world is non-existent because we are experiencing it all the time. So this identity, if you like, of something that is neither existing nor not existing, something between existence and non-existence, something that is inexpressible. And that is the adjective used to describe the world, which is nothing but a product of Maya, that it is inexpressible. The Sanskrit word for that is anirvachaniya, that which cannot be described, that which cannot be expressed. You cannot say about the world, this is how it is, because every time you make any statement about the world, every time you see the world, every time you try to describe it, the act of seeing, the act of describing itself is changing the world. Therefore, it forever remain indescribable. You cannot say it is, you cannot say it is not. What we can say is that the one who is seeing the world, the subject, the existence of the subject is beyond doubt. And that is why in Vedanta, we should feel free to question the existence of anything other than ourselves. Because whatever we might see could be a product of hallucination, could be my imagination, could be my dream, could be anything. Not that it is necessarily unreal, but I have a legitimate reason to question whether it is as it appears to be. What I cannot question, what would make no sense, is question my own existence. I can never ask myself, do I really exist? Because that would come into what would be a logical fallacy. Because I'm questioning my own existence. The question would be, do I exist or not? And then the question would be, who is asking the question? Does the questioner exist or not? Because if you doubt the presence of the questioner itself, then of course the question doesn't exist. But if the question exists, then the questioner exists as well. So these are some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you this morning, because the word Maya will come again and again and again, not only in the Gita, but also in the Upanishads. and in most Vedantic discussions. That is why Swami Vivekananda referred to it as an important pillar of Vedanta. And Swamiji says that the knowledge of Maya will break down fanaticism. People can become very dogmatic, people can become very fanatic. Because if I have a certain idea of the world, if I have a certain idea of God, I might then become fanatical and say, this is how God is, this is who God is, this is how the world is. And if someone might have a different way of looking at the world, a different way of understanding God, and then we can get into a good fight about it, whether my idea is right or theirs. And that's what the world has been doing all the time, and it looks like it probably will continue doing to a foreseeable future. But if I understand well this amazing, amazing idea of Maya, then we will not be fanatics. What we will say is this: my idea of the world is filtered through my understanding, and that's how the world I see it the way because this is who I am. Now, someone else might look at the world in a very different way, and that's okay because they are filtering it through their mind and the world appears to them in this way. Same thing with regard to the idea of God. My understanding of God, my idea of God, when I try to visualize the divine, I might visualize the divine in one way, because that's the way the divine makes sense to me, that's the way the divine speaks to me. That would be my ishta, my chosen ideal. But then to say that's the only way everyone should look at the world doesn't make sense, because everyone should have the same freedom that I have to relate to that reality and understand it and worship it and connect with it in their own way. That doesn't mean the reality is different. That doesn't mean everyone has a different God. God is transcendent, of course. The reality of God is unquestioned. But when that reality is something that when I try to connect with that reality myself, my act of connecting to that reality will kind of customize that reality for my own, which will relate, which will make sense to me. Again, you see the contradictions involved. It's so difficult oftentimes to find the right words to express the way things are. That's partly due to my own inability to express myself well, but partly also because of just the nature of this very contradictory existence. So let's keep some of these thoughts in mind, that going forward, when we continue the study of the Gita and other Vedantic subjects, let's try to reflect on this idea of Maya, because this is very, very helpful in clarifying our understanding about ourselves, about the world, and about God. And as I had mentioned last time, there are these 3 lectures of on Maya by Swami Vivekananda in his book on Jnana Yoga. It's in the 2nd volume of his complete works. If you have not read them yet, please do read them. If you have read them, please read them again. They are fascinating. When I was a college student years ago, so these were my most my most favorite lectures. God alone knows how often I read them, and I really found them very helpful. So I would strongly encourage you to read those 3 lectures on Maya that Swami Vivekananda gave. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Let's look at the questions. Ramakrishna said that God has bound us to the shackles of illusion, and he called it Mahamaya, the great illusion. How does the existence of Maya then fit in with the will of the divine? Put another way, why would God intend Maya? Every question assumes is based on certain assumptions. So when we ask a question, why would God intend Maya? We are assuming that Maya exists. And only when we assume that Maya exists can we say, why did God create this Maya? Or why did God bind us to this Maya? The problem is, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot say Maya is there. We cannot say Maya is not there. So it's possible to say God intended this Maya, but then also, well, the Maya is not there. Okay, let me put it this way. A better way to understand it would be this, that Maya exists as long as we are experiencing it. But it doesn't have an absolute existence. So God did not intend Maya any more than we intended our dream world. So when we really don't have much choice about the dreams that we see. Well, we know usually when we go to sleep, usually we see dreams. Oftentimes we don't remember our dreams, but we do see dreams. But we don't get to choose it. Actually, we don't even get to choose to sleep. We can get to choose to go and lie down in our bed. And sleep is something we hope it will come. But we cannot consciously go into sleep. We can create the environment which will be congenial for sleep to come, and then we just hope that sleep comes. And then once the sleep comes, we have no control over what kind of dream will appear. So if we think about, just as we cannot say that I intended my dream world, we cannot really say God intended Maya. That if we can think of God falling asleep, then the dream that God saw would be this entire universe, is the dream of God. And Maya is the sleep that has come over God. And the God is the divine spirit. And we might say, well, if God is consciousness, then how can consciousness become unconscious? Because sleep is really a state of unconsciousness to a large degree. We are conscious of the dream world, but we are unconscious of the waking world. So how can that which is ever conscious fall asleep? And the answer again is, it never fell asleep, but it feels as if it fell asleep. So that's the difficulty. It's difficult to answer this question in a linear, straightforward way, because we are essentially asking, how did this something which never happened? And the answer is, well, it never happened. But theistically, because we tend to think of God in an objective way, that here is this some divine presence somewhere, and that divine presence created us, created this world, and created Maya along with it. So that's the way we often tend to think in the initial stages of our spiritual life. But the more we begin to start questioning, then we realize that it is not some extraterrestrial being who has intended this Maya and so on. Therefore, a lot of the questions that often get asked, even about the presence of evil, even about suffering, and we ask, and these are very natural, understandable, emotional outpourings of the heart. We say, how could God allow this to happen? There's so many now, millions of people are infected by COVID. Thousands have died. Why did God allow this to happen? Now that we can understand the pain and the anguish behind this question. But there's a lot of emotional content behind that. Because if we just step back and say, there isn't like God sitting there and saying, okay, I'm going to send this COVID to everybody. So these are some of the limitations of thinking about God as a dualistic presence, independent of the spirit in my own heart. What is the relation between Maya and Prakriti? Well, Prakriti, understood as nature, is a product of Maya. It's like the dream world. So the content of my dream world, the dream world that I see, what provided the material from the dream world, of the dream world that I see. When I see mountains and rivers in my dream, what constituted those mountains and those dreams? When I meet people in my dreams, how did those people come? Now, all of that is Prakriti, the dream Prakriti, if you like. But that dream Prakriti became possible only because I slept. Because if I didn't sleep, I wouldn't dream. So Maya, which is the sleep, is the cause of Prakriti, which provides the content and material for the world that we experience. Is it possible to use Maya to go beyond Maya to know God? Well, Sri Ramakrishna does speak about Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. So we can say that we can use Maya to go beyond Maya. The concepts and ideas that are helpful to us in our spiritual life, the practices that we do, all of these practices are in the realm of Maya. So whether it is meditation, the study of books and study of all of this is really, we are still dealing with names and forms. So they are in the realm of Maya. But there are certain things in this realm of Maya which will help me break the bonds of Maya. So things such as all the things that come under whatever we see as our spiritual practice, although it's within the domain of Maya, that spiritual practice will help me go beyond Maya. So yes, we can say that we can use Maya to go beyond Maya. And we might say, well, if the spiritual practice itself is in Maya, how can it help me go beyond Maya? And the answer is not very complicated. My ignorance is within Maya, and therefore the knowledge that I get is also within Maya. In fact, one of the questions that often gets asked by students in Vedanta, students of Vedanta philosophy, is Brahman is real, but is the knowledge of Brahman real? Brahman is real, but Brahma Jnana, the knowledge of Brahman, is it real? And the answer is, knowledge of Brahman is not real. Because if knowledge of Brahman were real, then we are stuck with two realities, Brahman and knowledge of Brahman. And that would create a duality itself. So when we speak about non-duality, it means that Brahman alone is real. Secondly, it's not helpful to have a real knowledge of Brahman, because what we want to get rid of is ignorance of Brahman. The ignorance of Brahman can be removed only by knowledge that is at the same level. In other words, if ignorance is ultimately unreal, the knowledge that removes that ignorance also has to be ultimately unreal. A real knowledge cannot remove unreal ignorance. Just like when you go to sleep at night, and by your bedside, if you keep a glass of water and then you fall asleep, and in your dream you find yourself deep inside a desert and you are dying of thirst, the glass of water next to your bed is totally useless in quenching the thirst that you have in your dream. Just as dream thirst can be quenched only by dream water, and a waking thirst can be quenched by waking water. We cannot mix these up. The water by your bedside in the waking world is totally useless to quench the thirst you have in the desert in your dream world. In the same way, if I have to get rid of this Maya, this ignorance, then I need knowledge. The knowledge will have to be at the same level of this ignorance. And if this Maya is inexpressible and ultimately unreal, the knowledge would also have to be inexpressible and ultimately unreal. And so therefore, yes, we can use Maya to go beyond Maya, provided we understand the distinction between Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. Next question. What is the relationship of God with Maya? No relationship really, because God exists and Maya does not. In order for any relationship to occur, there have to be two independent entities which are then related to one another. And God and Maya are not two independent entities because God is the only existence. Next question. Does Maya create the illusion of doership, karta and bhokta? Yes, it does. How does it create? Because the reality is one. What Maya does, it covers that reality. When the reality is covered, that which is one no longer appears as one. That which is infinite no longer appears as infinite. So the infinite one becomes finite. The one becomes the many. And once you have the many, then inevitably the distinction between the doer or the I and the not I occurs. As I've often pointed out, that it is said that when a baby is born, that for the first few days and maybe weeks, the little baby has no idea of where the extent of its existence. That is where its body ends and the rest of the world begins. Everything appears to be an extension of itself. It's still, everything is in a kind of oneness. But it takes a few days or weeks. And the first time the baby realizes, I am somebody, I am someone, that's a fascinating discovery. But that discovery comes along with another discovery which may not be so fascinating. And that is, I am someone, but the moment I know I am this, I suddenly see everything else that is not me. Now, a little baby probably doesn't analyze it the way I'm doing it now. But oftentimes unconsciously, and then as we grow older and if we still think about it deeply, it becomes a very conscious observation that this me, the doer, is so small, so limited, so vulnerable. While that which is not me, the rest of this, everything that is not me is the universe. That is so huge, so much more powerful. And all of our anxiety and stress and worry and all of these are related to me, this I being so small. And then of course I have these limbs, and so I do things, I want to do things. So the idea of being a doer, and then I experience joy and sorrow in life. So all of these spring from Maya. Because once we go back to the state of oneness, there is no doer, there is no experiencer. I don't think we can understand Maya as long as we are in Maya. This is my understanding based on what I have heard or read so far. I don't quite agree with this because we are all in Maya. And if we are in Maya and we don't understand Maya, then there is no hope. because I can never then go beyond Maya. Yeah, what we can say is that when we are in Maya, it's not easy to understand Maya and go beyond it. But it's helpful to know that even when we are in Maya, we are not totally covered by Maya. There is a little bit of an opening. And this is made clear by that classical example given of a coiled rope which is mistaken for a snake. Now, that room has to be semi-lit. There has to be some amount of light in that room. You cannot have too much light because then you will know the rope as rope. You cannot have total darkness because then you can't see the rope at all and you cannot mistake it for a snake. You need partial light. Now, that partial light tells you that there is something, but not enough to know what that something is. And that's how then you mistake it for a snake. Now, that presence of that partial light is important for me to mistake one thing for another. So when I mistake the spirit within for these material entities like body and mind and the ego, I would not be able to perceive myself even as a body or mind without that partial light of consciousness. So we do, even now, in our deluded state, even in the state of ignorance, there is this partial light of awareness within us. And it is that light which always makes me aware, I exist. I don't need my body, mind, I don't need to read any books to know that I exist. So my knowledge of my own existence is that partial light that comes. That is what makes it possible. Where the darkness comes in is while I know that I exist, if you ask me, who am I really? So the nature of my existence is covered by the darkness. So rather than seeing myself as a divine being, I see myself as a human being. Rather than seeing myself as infinite, I see myself as finite. Rather than seeing myself as immortal, I see myself as mortal. So the darkness distorts the reality, but the light shows that I exist. So it is possible to understand Maya and transcend Maya if we hold on to that little bit of light which is already present in our heart even now, even at this very moment. The problem is most of our time, most of our energy, most of our life is gone pursuing these objects that are covered by darkness. So how much time I spend dealing with names and forms and ideas that take me away from that source of light in my own heart. But if I choose to invest my time and energy holding on to that little light which is already present now, which is already available to me now, I can understand Maya and I can transcend it. So it is possible to understand and transcend Maya even in our present state. Difficult? Yes, absolutely. It is difficult, but not impossible. Is the name Mahamaya is used to refer to Sharada Devi and any goddess? Maya is more associated with feminine form of God. Is this a simplification for our understanding? A gender is also a Maya? Yeah, sure. When we are going to use words, gender will get involved, especially in Sanskrit and many Indian languages, and I believe in some non-Indian languages as well. Everything has a gender. It's not like in English, pretty much mostly living entities have a gender and non-living are just neuter gender. Generally, mostly. But in Sanskrit and in many Indian languages, every entity is could say kind of living, and therefore Maya is a word, and it'll have to have a gender. And yes, Maya is, according to the grammatical rules, yes, it is a feminine gender. The goddesses and Sharada Devi are often referred to as Mahamaya, is one who is not, doesn't mean like a big Maya. What Mahamaya means is the power that transcends Maya. the power that controls Maya, the power which is which is the source of all Maya. It's in that sense the word Mahamaya is used. Of the two Prakritis, is the higher Prakriti the same as the Purusha of the Sankhya philosophy? We cannot make an exact equivalence, but yes, Purusha of the Sankhya philosophy is a principle of consciousness, and the higher Prakriti is consciousness. So in that respect, the two are similar. But the similarity ends there, because in Sankhya philosophy, the Purushas are infinite in number, while in Vedanta, consciousness is one and undivided. So there are not like many, there isn't even a plural term for consciousness. Consciousnesses, now there isn't any like that. And so that's the difference. So there is a similarity, but there is also a little bit of difference. Next question. Do we all experience the same Maya? Well, Maya as a form of ignorance, yes. It's like, do we all sleep? Yes, we all sleep. But we don't necessarily all see the same dream. And so, yes, we experience the same Maya. In fact, the idea we is itself Maya. Because God is one and infinite, and God falls asleep. So, there is only one reality who has fallen asleep. And in the sleep, the idea of we as many people together is itself a product of Maya. That's the idea. Next question. Is a realized person free of Maya? Yes. Only when a person is able to go beyond the domain of Maya, beyond this ignorance, only then a person is called realized or enlightened. Next. Is it helpful or misguided to try to understand Maya as a computer simulation, game or matrix, as often here in the digital age? Of course, I mean, some of these ways of understanding can be helpful. And some of the movies like the Matrix try to convey that idea that things may not seem as they are. That maybe collectively we have made certain assumptions about the world in which we live, and those assumptions may be totally inaccurate or totally false. Yeah, it can be very helpful. Next question. Are covering and projection the qualities of Maya? Absolutely. Maya is a form of ignorance, and ignorance has these two qualities, Avarana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti. Avarana Shakti is a power that covers, and Vikshepa Shakti is a power that projects. So just like going back to the example of the rope and the snake, the ignorance of the rope covers the rope, so I don't see the rope anymore, and in that place projects a non-existent snake, and that is a Vikshepa. Next. In summary, can we say that Maya is unreal, but it neither exists nor does it not exist? Yes. In fact, yes. So I totally agree. This will be a perfect statement. What we can also say is that oftentimes in the way the mind thinks, we associate reality with existence and that which is unreal as not existing. So even when we say Maya is unreal, what we have to understand by that is it is something that is unreal but appears to be real. And there is a special word for that in Sanskrit. So the word real means sat. The unreal is asat. Now that which is unreal but appears to be real is called by the term mithya. Now that is unreal itself, but to distinguish it from unreal, which can never appear as real, and unreal, which can sometimes appear as real. And finally, the last question, how do we perceive the word Maya in terms of space, time and causality? Well, space, time and causality in Vedantic texts, in Sanskrit they are called Desha, Kala, Nimitta. are themselves Maya. So it's not like Maya is a kind of a container in which these exist, but our way of understanding, our way of knowing through time, space, and causality is itself a Maya. So that's how the Vedanta books describe it. So that brings us to an end to our today's discussion. So Maya is a very fascinating subject. It's fascinating because think about it this way about fish. Now, there's lots and lots of fish in the oceans and the seas and the rivers. It's possible that a large number of these fish have not even thought about the world that may be outside the water in which they live and move. For many of them, that's the world. The world of the fish is the body of water in which the fish is. But think about some brave, courageous, intelligent, smart fish who now and then kind of come to the surface and say, no, I think there is another world out there. And some other fish who never even look up make fun of it. Are you fool? None of us has seen that world. Nobody has been there. So there is no world outside this water. Just come and live the way we do. But some fish would say, no, I think there is something out there. And some of these fish will kind of jump out and take a brief peep at this world outside. And some of them might say, can I just go and try to live outside? And one of the theories of evolution is that that's how aquatic creatures over millions of years then gradually develop the ability to live outside water. And that's how these creatures over land appeared. That's a little bit like how this whole world of Maya is. We are kind of surrounded by this world of Maya. And there are some amongst us who say, no, there is some reality beyond this. And to many, it might appear like, just forget about it. There is no such thing. That's just imagination. That's just the talk of these books. But some brave ones then say, no, let me just look up and let me go and try to cross this barrier. And those who do cross it, then they become enlightened. And it's their words, their experiences that have come down to us through the books like the Gita and the Upanishad. If we take these words to heart, if we build our lives, our ways of thinking, our ways of doing, our relationship, our work, everything that we do is built on these insights that we get from these great ones, then we too can then go beyond Maya. So please continue to reflect on this teaching. There is a lot that can help us in our daily lives as well when we think about Maya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.